There was once upon a time where unions needed to be heavily armed because you legally could send in people to fucking kill. Like, so, if you watch my channel a lot, then you know that things get kind of polarized over here. I'm a very opinionated person, and I don't like to filter the things I say outside of the restrictions that are put on me by the platforms that I speak on. In fact, my channel was banned on TikTok because of saying the things that I normally would say in any other scenario. But I haven't managed to be banned on YouTube yet. But because of that hyper-polarization that I know happens, because that's what happens when you have a lot of very strong opinions that lean one way politically, it might be a good idea to sometimes explore the ways that people can learn, the ways that we can battle polarization as opposed to contributing to it. But first, let's get to the fan art section, and then we'll go ahead and read the article that I had sent to me. This one is from Worthless. It said, Style of Princess Tutu. Aw, that's adorable. The next one we have here is from Bicornosaurus. My best friend helped me get into Kirby, so I drew Suris as a slime Kirby character. Aw, that's adorable. That is adorable. As always, everybody, thank you all for your fan art submissions. If you want your fan art to be shown in a future video, best way to do so is to drop in the fan art section of the Discord. Hit the like button if you haven't already, subscribe if you haven't already, and let's go ahead and get right into everything. So, this is the article that I have for us right now, is titled, Media Can Battle Polarization by Telling Personal Stories. People on opposing political sides often go beyond disagreeing with each other and instead actively dehumanize people in the other camp, meaning they think about them as less than human than those on their side, and the problem can be compounded in the media. I want to go ahead and piggyback off that real quick before we continue on. Fun things that happens with dehumanization. It's not just that we start treating people like they are animals. It's not just that we start treating people like they are worth less. We literally start acting as if we could never become those people, as if there is some magical barrier between us and them, as if in a different life we could not have just been them. But the reality is, the only difference between most of us and, say, an actual Nazi are a handful of life choices and the butterfly effect of those choices. There's a lot of people who watch my content who used to be right-wing extremists. There's a lot of people who watch my content who used to be in much more cacophonous scenarios with politically extreme individuals. But even to those of you who think you've been a left-wing supporter, ally, 100% always that person from the get-go, from the beginning, never forget that you are a culmination of a series of random circumstances. And those random circumstances could just as easily have led you in a different direction. Ultimately, we need to take responsibility for the people we become, but we need to have empathy for people who become something different. And never forget that they are not less than people or any less than us for doing it. But let's go ahead and continue here. Individuals may think that the person from the other side lacks self-restraint, almost like an animal. Dehumanization is often tied to harmful behavior. Sometimes dehumanization can even lead us to commit violence against other people who we view as less than human. Dehumanization is all over political media. Partisan news outlets often highlight the most extreme members of the other party and promote animosity towards people with whom their audiences disagree. That's a problem that researcher Emily Cuban wants to tackle. She recently performed a study published in the journal Political Psychology that looked into how we can instead use media as a tool to reduce dehumanization. In her study, participants were first sorted into different sides based on their points of view about a controversial issue. So, for example, gun policy. Are you pro-gun or anti-gun? So they kind of had to pick a side. The participants were given articles or social media posts to read that featured someone who disagreed with them about the issue. The reading might feature a personal anecdote, facts, or both. But for the gun policy example, if a survey participant was in the anti-gun camp, they might be presented with a political opponent who would explain they support gun rights because they had to use a gun for self-defense in the past. They could also cite facts about how often guns are used in self-defense in the United States. They could also share both facts and personal experience. And then the participants had an opportunity to tell us what they thought about that political opponent. So how tolerant were they? How tolerant were they of that person? How human did that person seem? How willing were they to dehumanize the individual? What Cuban found was that sharing personal experiences and pairing them with facts reduces political dehumanization and increases political tolerance more than just sharing facts alone. Cuban argued that the study may have implications on how the media presents contentious issues to help reduce polarization. The media could do more to highlight the personal experiences of people who hold certain positions and then provide context for those experiences with facts. You're sharing a harmful experience that someone had and then situating it within the statistics of how often that really is happening to make their opponents recognize, okay, the other side has valid reasons for holding their views. So I do kind of agree with this, and I know that the logic bros in my audience are gonna go like, actually, facts don't care about your feelings, so only the facts matter. This isn't about objective truth, though. Objectively, you're right. The statistics are the part that matters more. The amount of time that a thing is happening directly correlates to how much we need to address it in reality. However, if our goal is to humanize people, if our goal is to try to reach out to another side, if our goal is to look at somebody and try to convince them of our perspective, humans are flawed people. The best way to do that for most people is not random ass bits of facts. Certainly put them into the conversation, yes, but those personal anecdotes, at the end of the day, we are not logic machines. We're human beings. We use our type 1 thinking far more than our type 2 thinking. It makes a lot more sense for most humans to have those personal anecdotes given to them so that they know why you think the things you do. Hey, why do you agree with guns? Well, I think guns are a useful thing because I've had to defend myself with one. Or, hey, I'm part of a union, and one of the only ways that we really can make sure that our employer doesn't abuse us is by having literally an armed union. There was once upon a time where unions needed to be heavily armed because you legally could send in people to fucking kill. Like, companies, when we think of union busting nowadays, we don't think of a violent union bust, but union busting used to be a violent thing. So when I bring up that whole, like, hey, there are workers who want to be pro-gun because they have had to defend a union before with guns, understand, I'm not pulling that up out of my butt. That's a thing that happened historically. I don't know. Why did the Black Panthers like guns? Probably because they needed some kind of equalizer between them and an overly aggressive police force, so that when people of color were actually, you know, arrested, people in the Black Panthers could watch over that arrest and make sure that nothing untoward happened, at least during the course of the arrest. Historically, that's a thing that happened. There have been points in time in American history where the good guys have had to be the ones with the guns. The good guy with a gun idea is a stupid one in general, because when we think about the good guy with a gun conversation, we're almost always thinking about the person who has a gun in the middle of a mass shooting. But the reality is there's plenty of left-wing situations that have not only benefited from, but needed that equalizer. That's a perspective that I hold that, despite me being very left-wing, is one of the reasons why I'm pro-gun. We have historically needed them because the state is oppressive. Duh. Yeah, the likelihood of going up against the United States military in its full force with guns is not something that we can actually fathom doing or succeeding in. Absolutely not. But it turns out that most of the times, that has not been the scenario. A lot of the times, it's been a scenario of making sure that police officers aren't abusing our own. A lot of times, the scenario is making sure that a home invader leaves or otherwise does not harm you. Sometimes in my situation, it's a matter of coyotes came on the property and tried to kill your dog. Like, I'm sorry, and I shouldn't be interweaving this into the article, but I guess that's like me agreeing with it. These are things that happen. Left out of the research was whether the experiment changed people's minds, Cuban said. It doesn't mean that I'm going to believe your fact and have it change my mind on the issue. The experiment only looked at the short term, so it's unknown how long-lasting the effects of exposure to personal experiences and facts could be. But Cuban argued that this may be one reason for institutions like the news media to build this into their regular practice. Maria says, wait, coyotes did? No, coyotes have not done a thing specifically here on my property yet. But on my parents' property, with their goats, they most certainly had. And my parents' property is adjacent to mine, so that's a couple steps to the left. If we're continuously showing people on the other side's experiences for why they hold their opposing views, whether it be about immigration or education or healthcare, whatever the issues are, if you consistently are seeing this on a regular basis and you're engaging with media, I think this can lead to more long-lasting, larger effects in terms of your overall views towards political opponents. So, I would have liked to see some data on how many people changed their mind on these things, but I do agree with the meat of the study. I do agree with the concept. I have to ask a couple questions here, and I want you guys to answer this in the comment section. I want you to take the worst person you can think of. The worst person. This person is a skinhead. They are a neo-Nazi. They are a misogynist. They're racist. They're an absolute piece of shit. I want you to ask yourself right now, how did they get there? I want you to honestly consider that. How did that person become who they are? If you can't fathom it, then you need to learn how to fathom it. You need to figure out why that person fell down that far. What myriad of scenarios could have possibly led a person to fall down so far into that extremist ideology that they are who you would consider the absolute worst person in the world? Villains are not born. Villains are made. It's through empathy that we are able to understand how they're made. And while that might not be a super useful thing in protecting us from those villains in the there and now, I'm not doing this everybody hug out and love each other, love your enemy bullshit. Not doing that. What I am saying is that it is way easier to help people out of extremist ideology if you have been there before. If you have been in that scenario before, or if you know somebody who has and you know the reasons they fell down that ideology, the likelihood of you helping somebody else out of that ideology increases tenfold. It increases tenfold. Striker says it's nice to think that, but some people are beyond help. I don't give a shit that some people are beyond help. I don't. I will flat out say that. I don't care. It's not on us to judge if somebody is beyond help. We're also not in that person's brain to figure out if they're beyond help. And if somebody is beyond help, understanding how they got to the point where they're beyond help will help us stop other people from getting to that point. And I don't think there's any argument with that perspective. I don't think you can argue with that perspective. If somebody is beyond the threshold where they can change, if they are truly and honestly far past that point, then at the very least, understanding how they get there, how they got in that scenario, will do you a world of good in stopping someone else from falling where they are too. Because at the end of the day, we are all human, and all of us have an equal capacity for good or evil. I used to be a very, very conservative Christian. What about nature versus nurture? Hate teaches hate? Cool. Hate teaches hate. What hate were they taught? How often were they taught it? Was there anybody who intervened in their life to try to stop them from falling down that far? If not, maybe being the person who intervenes for somebody else will stop them. Hate can be taught, but hate can also be untaught. I don't give a shit about hate teaches hate or nature versus nurture. They're both platitudes, and they mean jack shit in the real world. Platitudes are things we use so that we have short and quippy sayings that get us through the day. We don't have to think harder about something if we have a platitude that very quickly and neatly explains a thing. I used to think the world was 6,000 years old because I grew up in Pensacola Christian Academy and that's what I was told. The only type of person who could have convinced me to believe in actual science at that time would have been another Christian. Because from my perspective, anybody who wasn't a Christian was not to be trusted. They were unbelievers, they were going to hell, they had nothing positive to contribute to my life that was not some type of indoctrination away from the Word of God. Even curse words were awful to me. I used to look at men who had earrings with disgust. It took having a science teacher who was Catholic. It took having a science teacher who was a Catholic, because as far as I was concerned, that was another type of Christian, to explain to me that you could be Christian and believe in evolution for me to start believing in actual fucking science. It took one of my best friends, who also at the time was Catholic, who wasn't a homophobe, to convince me that I didn't have anything to worry about with people around me who were gay that were in our friend group. I was called out by that friend for being a homophobe, and I couldn't hide behind my Bible because they had a Bible that looked a whole lot like mine. Them having an ounce of my perspective is the only thing that managed to move me away from that position. So I know from experience that having that perspective can change someone's mind. Do you want to know why I started making atheist content and found myself on the progressive side of politics here on YouTube? It's because I started watching anti-SJW bullshit. Because I was looking for ways to tell people that my feminist ex was wrong. That's why. That's how I started discovering people like Sargon and Thunderfoot and shit. Back during the heyday of making fun of Anita Sarkeesian. I walked down that particular rabbit hole because I was looking for excuses as to why a person that I did not like anymore was wrong. And when I found them, I slowly started to discover more progressive atheists. I was already slowly divorcing myself from the idea of religion to begin with. I've talked about this in other episodes before. I started deconstructing my idea of what a religion was and why we had it. And then I moved from that into feeling like I didn't really believe in God all that much anymore. And then lo and behold, I found that a lot of these anti-SJW creators were also atheists. And then from watching them, I started finding other creators who were producing the atheist content that I had stumbled into, but were more progressive. And my ideas on things started to get challenged a lot more. My ideas on trans people, my ideas on gender, my ideas that I was reinforcing with content before was being challenged with content. But every single step of the way, it required the person that I interacted with on that step, whether parasocially or in real life, to have some connection to my personal story. I needed somebody who was a Christian to get me away from anti-science bullshit. I needed a person who was a Christian to move me away from being a homophobe. I needed somebody who was an anti-SJW to get me more comfortable with the concept of atheism, and I needed people who were atheists at that point because that was now part of my personal identity. I just had it more close by name at that point. It took that to move me down that line, but every single time, without fail, if that person had been so far outside of my Overton window that I would have just had a culture shock looking at them, I would have dismissed everything they said from the get-go. If you had presented me in high school with a gay, atheistic, transgender person, they would have been my enemy. You know how I know that? Because they were. Not a hypothetical they. There was actually a person, a real-life, living, breathing person. They weren't atheistic at the time. They were that person, and I actively considered them an enemy of mine, a person that I did not like, a person I wanted nothing to do with. And now, that exact same person, I played Magic with them. Literally, 2 months ago, in Florida. Played Magic with him and his husband. I know from experience, you want to move somebody's position on something, you've got to be able to meet them on their terms. You're not going to be able to beat them down with facts. You're not going to be able to beat them down with all the ways in which you're right. It's not going to work that way. You're going to need something, some kind of bridge between you and someone else. If you don't have that, you will never convince them of anything. You need to meet a person in their arena and you need to show them that it's okay to expand it. And you might only do it a little bit at a time, but as long as you're doing it, as long as you're trying, that's what matters. You will move more people outside of hatred by, instead of clubbing them with the bat, calling them bigot, trying to figure out why they're a bigot. And if you find somebody that is, in your opinion, so far gone that the only thing left is clubbing them with the bigot bat, then at that point you do things publicly so that other people see it and there's other good that can come from it. But when we're just human beings in private talking with each other one-on-one, when we're there in that scenario, meet, not confront people. You'll do yourself a hell of a lot of good, and you'll probably do that person a lot of good. And if you fail, learn from the failure. At the very least, get their perspective. Figure out why they're the way they are. You might not be able to help them. You can fix and help somebody else. Forknut, thank you for the follow. But I've gone on a tangent there. And hopefully that tangent has been helpful to someone. Hit the like button if you haven't already. Subscribe if you haven't already. Let me know any personal experiences you have in that regard. But with all that said, insert end of video tagline here.